Trailer Rewind, a monthly conversation about movies you may have missed in theaters that are now available to watch at home on streaming services. Every month we dig into the archives and watch a film that was one of the trailer picks on a Saturday matinee episode. You can get access to the SatMat shows by supporting us over at patreon.com/thenextreel. And you can also be part of our group on Discord, where there's always an engaging conversation about films. And right around this time of year, there's lots of speculation about, awards, Oscar picks, all of those things, with that just coming up right around the corner. But today we are talking about The Bachelors.
Sure.
This was Pete's pick from September 30th, 2017. Today is February 6, 2019, and The Bachelors is available on Netflix. That was the only place I found this one. Looking into what happened to this after we talked about it in September 2017, there was no theatrical release in the United States for The Bachelors. Yes, this seemed like this is that art house indie type of film. It had a small theatrical release in Portugal, South Korea, and the United Kingdom.
That's weird.
Yes, and it made just over $100,000 worldwide. So not a lot of screens out there. And then shortly after we talked about it as a trailer pick,
that seems odd.
It was available for digital purchase on iTunes on October 20th, 2017, and then showed up on Netflix a few months later on February of 2018. So it's been out there on Netflix for nearly a year. So it just went straight to streaming for this one. So there was no opportunity for people to see this in the United States in theaters, which I found odd given the cast. We've got familiar faces. You've got J.K. Simmons. You've got Julie Delpy for those, fans of the small little art house films.
Sure.
Pete said he found himself moved by this trailer, and he just loves J.K. Simmons' beard. So he's got a little thing for the bearded man.
I love J.K. Simmons.
Yes.
That regard beard or no.
Yes.
So I would see it just because of him.
Right. And he said the trailer he thought showed these heartfelt characters that he wanted to spend more time with. Andy said the trailer gave him all of the feels. And I said this one I thought was going to be rated K for Kleenex, and we can talk about whether that that premonition was fulfilled. And Andy summed it up by saying he thought this might be like the male version of Lady Bird, because we've got a father and son dynamic going with this one.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So,
and coming off of our A24 film last month,
right,
with Lena and Pete, so that's interesting. I hadn't considered it that way.
Yeah, so not an A24 film, but had that feel.
Sure.
Do you feel that this really missed? Should this have had a theatrical release? Was there an audience out there for this type of film? Is this something that's worth getting people to see on Netflix?
Well, I mean, yes, probably. I'm going to answer your last question first. I think yes, probably it has an audience on Netflix. I think the movie, there's a lot of interesting things that happen in it, and there's some really innovative filming and some innovative ideas. I think in general, some of the difficulty is that it's really overwritten in some places and it's really underwritten in other places. And for a story, I definitely sense what was being tried or trying to be conveyed. I really sense what the message is in the movie. Unfortunately, the way that it goes about getting there is really sort of clunky and actually kind of unbelievable in a lot of places. And I really had a lot of problems with the story because of that. And some of the performances were a little rough or really sort of underperformed as well. And that was tough for me too. So while the idea is great and there's some really innovative things in it, I think if you're looking for it to get a theatrical release, I don't think it's strong enough to get that, unfortunately, even on the heels of such a wonderful cast like this. So I admire this movie, but I don't think it's particularly good, unfortunately.
So it didn't move you. You didn't have the heartfelt characters that you wanted to spend more time with, as Pete described it.
Well, it's tough because the actors are also lovable, and the characters are not poorly drawn by any means. It just feels I really felt the hands of the puppeteer. I really felt the writing coming through. And a lot of times, many of the actors, and not some of the bigger names in this, but some of the other actors, you really could kind of feel them acting to the script, and delivering lines that were kind of written for them as opposed to embodying them. And that was really tough for me to get out of it. So when there were some moments that I was supposed to be emotional, I found myself being cynical, and that was really unfortunate. I don't want to be. I want to be able to embrace the heartfelt stuff in this movie, but a lot of times it just felt either over the top or more for the purpose of delivering the story to us.
So yeah, because we've got familiar faces. We said J.K. Simmons and Julie Delpy in this, and so in terms of their relationship that develops, because we've got, I guess we should set this up a little bit. We've got a situation where we've got a father and son that just, at the beginning of the film, dad says, I got to get out of here. We're moving. And they just move out of their house. We find out that, mom has passed away. And so this is a fresh start. So we've got, sort of in a period of mourning. We need to get away, fresh start. So J.K. Simmons' character Bill is a math teacher, and he's got a friend from college that has set him up with a job at this private school. So in
in Southern California, Los Angeles,
yes.
area.
And his friend is Mr. Abernack, played by Kevin Dunn, one of those guys. You familiar face. You're like, yes,
a great character actor.
Yes, exactly. And then Julie Delpy is the French teacher. So we get a little romance that occurs between Bill and Corinne. Now, did you buy that? Did you have issues with that relationship? Their performances there was that because it's sort of the core to Bill's arc, with his getting over that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have chemistry. I don't doubt their chemistry, but unfortunately, I think it's just really written. It's very telegraphed, the entire thing. It's very quaint. It's very trite. It's exactly what you would expect from the story. There's nothing strange about it, and there's nothing really profound about the way that it comes to it. The profound pieces of this film were meant to be the emotions, and those I felt were pretty overwritten.
Okay.
So it's not that I didn't buy that it could happen. It's that I didn't buy that it was happening in anything other than a Hollywood or a movie. This was a movie. This is something that you watched on screen, in that, the math teacher goes and gets the job with the principal, who happens to be the ex-boyfriend of the mom who's dead.
Right.
And he falls in love with the French teacher. I mean, it's just, there wasn't any room for anything other than what the story was.
So you felt the architecture of the film a lot, of this scene is happening. Totally. Because we've got it. So yeah, early on we have a scene of Bill teaching class, and one of the students asks him about his belt, and we briefly see that Bill's belt is shifted over to the right side, and he pulls his jacket over it and comments, "Oh, it's just a thing I do." And I thought, well, okay, we're going to have to find out about this belt thing, because we're now given, like, here's one of these character quirks that we're going to learn more about later on. And so I kept waiting for that scene where we're going to get the explanation about what's going on with Bill's belt. And it's one of those things I feel is sort of common in the independent film. We've got to have something about this character. How can I communicate this? Oh, I'm going to have something quirky about this person. So then they can tell a story, and there's a reason for this exposition, this information dump to happen. And we get that in a conversation with his therapist, the story about the belt.
Tell me about the belt.
That's a Jeannie thing. She used to tease me because my belt would kind of drift over that way as the day went on. Said I should just start out the day with it where it was going to end up. So one day I just started out with it there and made her laugh. She said it was only fitting because I was a little off-center to begin with.
She had a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
Okay. So I find that grieving spouses usually fall into one of two groups. One describes their loved one as someone who filled a void in them. The other describes them as someone who added a dimension to the person they already were. Which would you say best describes you?
It's both.
Which would you say you favor?
All of the above.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm just looking for something to help us move on.
From what?
From your wife, Bill. The only way you're going to feel better is if we figure out some way for you to let her go. You recognize that, don't you?
Yes.
So, JJ, how did you feel about this scene with the therapist as the payoff for that setup earlier about the belt and revealing a little bit more about Bill?
Well, I think it's fine, but I think you make a good point in that, you know, when they bring it up, everything that's brought up in this film has to have an information dump or some larger exposition later. And it's not done poorly. It's just done very sort of textbook or very, you know, you mentioned the architecture of the film. I think that's a good way to look at it. You can see the rafters of what's going on in this movie throughout. And there are some artful things that are nice here, but it's still the rafters are still visible. And that's the thing that bothered me about things like this. I think it's great and I think it's cute and potentially a little too cute. It feels like if you look at Kurt Voelker, that's the writer director of this film, and you look at his IMDb credits, it feels like an early film for him. It feels like he's experimenting with how to bring his ideas to the screen. And this is, you know, maybe his second real sort of feature direction piece. And I think you get that sense of that. It's not bad, but there's still so much that needs to be done to kind of weave it together into an actual piece of art.
Yeah, I felt the same thing. These were, I don't want to say cliches, but I'm getting all of the things that I expect in a, you know, sort of small independent film. And it felt like, right. I haven't seen a film like this in a while, so I felt like this is something I would expect out of like the mid to late 90s. We've got, you know, the new kid at school. So we've got all of those things. And this one, I felt started to push a little bit more toward the traditional like teen rom-com with we've got the jock bully, we've got our new kid who falls in with
Mason. Mason's the jock bully.
Yes, and we get, you know, our new kid sort of falls in with sort of the geeky outcasts who are, you know, lamenting that they're not part of the in crowd, but if being part of the in crowd is like being like Mason, they don't want to do that. It's sort of
right.
Struggling with the, you know, the in, you know, being the in group or the out group, and then of course Wes gets the opportunity to bridge that gap because he gets assigned to be a homework partner for, you know, the girl, you know, his you know, as the girls, you know, pull up to, because they were at an all boys, you know, private school, but apparently the girls have to come over to take a class from their school, French class. So we've got this whole scene of like, walking in slow motion, the wind blowing in her hair, but she's cold and not, you know, she's not friendly like all the other girls that say hi to all the guys.
Lacey.
Yes. So of course, you know, we see now they're going to be set up as homework buddies. So he's going to crack through that tough exterior, and, you know, we've got that setup. For me, what I felt was unique about it was to give Lacey, well, I guess I shouldn't have expected her to come from a happy family because she's, you know, sort of got this cold exterior. But to me, what I wasn't expecting was the whole issue of cutting that was part of her way of dealing with or responding to her parents' divorce. And it was more graphic than I expected it to be, because we actually have seen her cut her arm. And there were several times when they're studying, you know, it's bleeding through on her blouse. And I don't know if it's because of like the Netflix series, 13 Reasons Why, or
sure,
of, you know, dealing with those things. But I didn't expect a film like this to tackle that directly like that.
Well, and so that, I guess that's when I get into my argument about how the film is underwritten a little bit.
Okay.
In the way it deals with mental illness altogether. I think the film that I know that I think of the most when I think of cutting scenes is Secretary, where Maggie Gyllenhaal cuts before she meets the James Spader, and then eventually she learns of a different way to cope, and it's really graphic in that nature too. But I think you're right in that that it doesn't. It seems too much. It seems too intense when I think about the therapy journey that Bill goes on, and that he's with a psychiatrist and they're prescribing different meds for him. And eventually he has a bit of a breakdown and they give him electroshock therapy.
Yes.
It's just, it seems all very intense, which is not a problem in film. However, their situations the character situations are not written in such a way that would lead you to believe that they are so intensely afflicted by these maladies. In other words, Bill's coping mechanisms before he gets to the prescriptions and eventually this breakdown in electroshock therapy, his coping mechanisms are pretty good. He moved away. He started riding a bike. He's gardening. He's doing all these things. And yet the story tends to point a finger at Bill and says, you are severely depressed. The same could be said about this Lacey character in that she is holing up, she is isolating, she's doing poorly in school, but then it gives her this extreme sort of outcome too. And that's where I feel like it's underwritten in that we don't see these characters in the way that they're supposed to be so darkly written, but we see what they have to do to deal with that. And I think especially, thinking about mental illness and thinking about other examples of mental illness, other examples of grief movies that we've seen, I think about Demolition is one that we watched in the film board as well, that I think is a really good, intense way of looking at grief. This one seems to talk about grief as a heading and then list a bunch of things that are going to happen to people who are intense grief. It never really conveys it through what the characters are doing. And that's why I have a lot of problems with the things that they're doing to cope with the grief, and ultimately the prescriptions that they're given to take care of it too, because it just seems so massively like using a sledgehammer to put in a thumbtack. And that's where I feel like the story is underwritten to describe the real sort of terrible things that these characters are going through.
Well, I agree with you, because you've got this serious, heavier, dark side, but then you've got it's trying to balance that with some lighter moments. And when you have a scene after Bill has his breakdown, when his therapist is talking with, Mr. Abernack and saying, he's had what would have been called a nervous breakdown, and his depression is manifesting itself physically. And we got what sort of was like a synopsis out of a textbook. It just felt very stilted dialogue. It didn't feel like this
Right.
is the way someone would really talk, a therapist. Now, perhaps trying to explain in layman's terms something complex, but it felt very odd the way that Harold Perrineau as Dr. Rollins, is describing this. Is this the right time? Is this the right person to be sharing this with, to give this very sort of, technical, description of what's going on with Bill? And I felt this is, again, we're trying to get exposition across.
You're talking about at the hospital.
Yes,
wow.
at the hospital.
Yeah, that was just
yes.
totally inappropriate. Do not have that conversation with his boss.
Right. Yes,
and
exactly.
It's just, it was really sort of creepy. Although the boss is the person that referred him, it's just,
yes,
all these characters are written in it's too perfect. It's too much written for the script. And it's just not something the way that it should go in real life. It's totally inappropriate for an actual situation, especially dealing with mental illness and nervous breakdown.
Well, and I guess that goes back to why I said this felt like something from the 90s, what, as independent films were, gaining, more attention. A lot of them, I just felt like, yes, there's a writer or director trying to tell a story about something that's deeply personal to them, and they can't get that distance from it, but they know what the structure of a film should be. And so you can feel the pieces being pushed around. And as I said, there's all these typical moments. I felt the cast, could rise, maybe lift this material up. But coming back to the lightness, we get, again, the other quirky moment that stuck out to me was the car seat.
Right.
Because he's got this, classic Mustang, and, early on Bill gives it to Wes, and says, hey, here, you have the car. I'm going to ride a bike. And, we see Wes driving the car. Lacey, as a gift, gets a seat because there is no front passenger seat to this car. And apparently through Craigslist or however she got it, she didn't get the right seat. She got another driver's seat. And so it can't go in the way it's supposed to. It has to be facing backwards, which two things went off my head. And I thought, well, I don't know if that's actually true. Secondly, that doesn't seem like safe. It felt like a thing to do to be unique and quirky. And actually, I was watching this with my daughter, Emma, And my wife came in near the end and said, "What's with the seat?" And we said, "Oh, well, there's this thing." And she said, "Well, wait, didn't they drive across country? Wasn't there a front seat? What happened to the front seat?" And then there was a flashback to Bill having a flashback of driving with his wife, and she's there with her sunglasses and her scarf, and she's like, "Well, wait, in that flashback, she's in the front seat."
She is. I didn't even think about that.
So what happened to the front seat? She's like, did they not explain? Like, was there not even anything to explain why there is no front seat? And I thought, oh, there's no front seat because the story needs there to be no front seat, so we can put in a backward seat to have scenes where, we've got this fun moment as they're driving around with one of them.
It's not even that. I mean, it's not really in service to the story.
No.
It's just, like you said, it's quirky. Right. And it makes for a good movie poster. Or at least a disarming movie poster that you want to look at.
But it did create, and because you are one that is always looking at, camera and how, scenes are structured. There's a scene where Wes and Lacey are out. It's after Bill's birthday party, and, sort of they go out, to have their private moment in the car, and they're just hanging out and talking. But because she's in the front seat facing backwards, to shoot that scene, you can't shoot as a typical conversation where you're cutting just back and forth. We're having to go to get the coverage from the front of the car to the back of the car, and it kept switching. And as they're having conversations, we're just cutting back and forth. And to me, it just drew a lot of attention to it. It wasn't like I was there. It was clear that, I guess it's that 180 rule, because you're flipping back and forth, and it is short lines and cutting. It started to bother me visually, that I thought you couldn't think of a different way to shoot this scene. You couldn't have them get out of the car. There were so many other ways to maybe troubleshoot this, but they wrote themselves into a situation where if they're in the car because of that seat situation, we're really limited in how we can shoot this, which I thought there's a problem that should have been dealt with when writing that scene, to think about, this is not going to work visually.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good way to think about this, that a lot of the scenes, a lot of the specificity of this film feels like it writes itself into a corner. And that it just didn't work in some of those things. Now, that being said, there are a lot of beautiful shots in this film.
Yes.
We talk about the sort of beauty of A24 films and stuff like this. It's not the same. It's definitely not naturally lit throughout. It's cutting a lot of things in a very Hollywood style. It's sort of small and independent that way. But there are some really beautiful motion control camera movement shots. My favorite shot of the movie was one early on when Bill is definitely still grieving. They're in the LA house, and the shot starts wide, looking at him from the side as he's looking at a painting of Jeannie, his wife's painting. And then the shot kind of pulls in closer to him and then goes over his head to use this huge painting and have it fill up the screen. There's a lot of really neat camera moves and camera shots like that throughout this movie. But it's just, they're not really in service to the story. It's just that other extra piece of art. It looks like this is the kind of stuff that's going to be great for this filmmaker later in his career. Right now, this story was too structured. It had too much architecture for it to get out of its own way in the script.
As we talk about structure with a film like this that's really character driven, I found myself not quite looking at my watch, but at maybe about an hour in, thinking, where are we going? How are we resolving these issues? Because we've developed the relationships between characters. So we've got Wes and Lacey have their connection, with Mason causing, conflict. We have, Bill and Corinne and their relationship. And we get to a certain point where I thought, we've got to have something break down here. Something's got to happen to give us our, sort of darkness before the light at the end. And I think it was at this point my wife walked in when Bill has a conversation with Corinne, and he basically says he doesn't want to see her anymore. She's like, she's like,
at that point,
why is he being such a jerk? What is with this? She's like, that seemed really rude. And I thought about that. I thought, it didn't do a good enough job of setting up what was going on with him internally
Right.
to make that
It
decision.
never.
With Wes and Lacey, there was
It assumed we knew.
yes,
And that's where it's underwritten.
yes,
Because he has this breakdown after he breaks up with Karine.
yes,
And it's like, yeah, it just, unfortunately, it doesn't work.
right. So yeah, he has the breakdown right after that. So clearly, that's meant to be the trigger point for his breakdown, which is going to take us into a really interesting part. We talked about this electroshock therapy, and as he was having that,
Is that real? Does that still happen?
It's electro. What do they call it? Electroconvulsive therapy. So it's
ECT.
ECT.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
And they
still,
try to explain it away. The therapist says it's much safer now. We do it, but I just don't. I mean, I'm ignorant, but I just don't think that is that a thing.
that
still?
it is still a thing. It is still a thing. I was surprised.
For depression, though.
Yeah, that I don't know. I know it's still around, but I was surprised that I thought, oh, this is the doctor pushing Bill into a corner, basically saying you've got to start taking control of your life. You've got to start, helping yourself. And I thought this is going to be I don't want to do that. This is how bad my situation is.
Right.
It's going to motivate him to do something. And then, oh no, we go through with it. And I thought, really? We're gonna sit here and watch him have his because I'm thinking the same thing. This is like barbaric treatment. And as they show it, it's not full body convulsions. It's, just apparently more precision in placement of every, electrodes on the head of which areas they're sending the current through.
Right.
And so you can see
Well,
his
I
arm.
want to read from WebMD here, which is,
Okay.
I don't know how we feel about it, but it says, when medication fails to ease the symptoms of clinical depression, there are other options to try. Brain stimulation techniques such as electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, for example, can be used to treat major depression that hasn't responded to standard treatments. I get it. I didn't know it was still a thing. That's a surprise to me. But he doesn't have, I don't see evidence of major depression in the character the way it's written. That's my problem with the way they describe mental illness here.
Yes.
And it leads us to literally Bill kind of becoming a zombie. I mean, it's hard to watch when you don't see how bad he has it, for them to explain away what they say is a nervous breakdown, which is saying that his grief has become so strong that now it's physical. And then saying that the next step is ECT. It feels like a big leap.
It does, because we're still, if we think about timeline, we're still within, the school year. I don't know. We didn't get a strong setup at the beginning of, I guess they came out at the beginning of the school year. It's hard to see time pass when you're in Southern California, because we don't really have the seasons of everything. So it's hard to get a sense of how much time has passed. We know that we've seen Bill, there have been 3 different medications. So I'm assuming it's not, we're going to give this one 2 weeks and then we're going to switch
and
you.
And the film uses their brand names too, which I think is interesting.
And that was, I noted that as well. I thought, wow, you're not just saying I'm going to prescribe something. They're naming 3 different ones that, I thought that was unusual. And I thought, how long, to give a specific medication a cycle to see if it's being effective. I understand if something's not working, changing it, but I was trying to get a sense of time, and is this a realistic time frame to see whether something works? But again, I agree with you. I didn't get a sense that Bill's depression was the point where it was so severe that we were going to have to get to ECT. A nervous breakdown, yes, is an important point, but it wasn't, I didn't see this, he is really having trouble functioning and being in the world because his depression is so severe that he is really having trouble functioning. And I felt like they tried to get to some things. Again, in those conversations with the therapist, you could see that, Bill is still struggling to be objective about things, because the therapist asks him, sometimes we see, people as someone that, fills a hole within us, or, he gives him, a situation. Which one of these do you feel applies to you? And Bill is just basically, well, all of them. I'm in this grief and I can't, define this. And I thought that's okay, but there are so many more ways we could be showing this with Bill. And I guess we don't have a lot of time, because we also have to deal with what's going on with Wes and Lacey. And then, of course, Wes being on the track team. And we have, that perspective of what's going on with Wes, as we see that it's connected to the being on the track team of, the conversation with the coach, after a track meet, and Wes hasn't done so well. And he basically tells him, look, this is what I know about running track. It's pain, and you have to just push through it. You have to accept it and move through it. And I thought, okay, here's, let's just wave the big flag saying, okay, Wes, this is how you're going to,
here's our metaphor.
Here's our metaphor for your grief. You have to just push through that. So we have all that going on, which doesn't give us a lot of time to really spend time with Bill and his grief. And I think the amount of time or attention, it deserves to be treated, seriously, or well handled in the film.
Right. Right.
So
it deserved more care.
Yes,
I agree.
So when Bill returns home after a cycle of the ECT, as you say, he is really sort of like a zombie. They're, he and Wes are at the dinner table, and Wes finally confronts him about the depression and basically calls him out on his unwillingness to live his life, basically saying, you've got to do something. I can't go on this way.
So, why don't you just get it over with then?
Good. What?
Dying. That's what you're really doing, right? I know you're depressed. And I know that I'm supposed to be supportive.
I'm not asking you to do anything.
Yes, you are. You're asking me to just accept it. Just sit back, just watch you die, just like Mom.
I know this has been hard.
Yeah, you think? I mean, first my mom dies, and then we just pack up and leave. Out of the blue, out of nowhere.
With your mom and I were
We're
more...
everything. Okay, I know. I get it. But do you honestly think that this is what she would want? Mom is amazing. You think I don't miss her every single second of every single day? But here's the headline, Dad. She's gone. Forever. And she's never, ever coming back.
Wes, I am so sorry.
I don't want sorry! I want my dad back.
I'm here.
No, you're not. And you haven't been for a long time. If I'm gonna have to spend the rest of my life alone, tell me now. Because if you're just gonna give up and die, then maybe I should too.
Wes, please don't say that.
I'm serious! That's what this is all about, right? If there's a point to all this, to living. I mean, whether it's worth it to even try. We'll make up your goddamn mind, Dad. If the answer is no, why don't you just fucking kill yourself and get it over with?
So, JJ, this is one of those moments that in some movies can feel like it's a little too on the nose or overwritten so much that it stops feeling like natural dialogue. Was this one of those moments for you in this movie? Or did this feel like, no, this is actually a realistic conversation between a father and son that are confronting their mutual grief?
Well, this is, wow. I want to say I had trouble getting to an analytical level about it because of, in talking about the dialogue in particular, because I was so taken with J.K. Simmons being zombified as a result of the electroshock therapy. And I actually think that everything delivered by his son, and I'm actually looking for the actor's name that played that played Wes here,
Josh Wiggins. Josh Wiggins.
Yeah, I think he did a great job of emoting what he had to work with there. I think I was fine with the emotion, but I was so confused at what was happening with them emotionally because it was so intense. And so I think that for that scene, and it is terribly intense, and I think that considering what Wes has gone through, I think it's realistic to think that he would get to that point. I think it's horrifying to think of what Bill is going through and having to handle that being thrown at him in that scene. And I think that was what I was most scared for, I was scared for Bill. And Wes needed an outlet, but I was scared for Bill. So I was captivated emotionally, but it was almost that I still felt so vulnerable about the treatments that were going on with Bill that I was scared for the dad, for J.K. Simmons' character. And so I wasn't able to get analytical about the way it was written because, holy cow, he just got out of electroshock therapy, and now you're doing this to him. Like, what's going to happen next? That's kind of where I was with it.
Okay, yeah, because this was the big turn for me because we got to a point where we're finally sort of head on there. This is, the pivot point for Wes. I think he's realized how, he's been handling things, and that his, again, telling Bill, you have to, I can't sit here and watch you die. That I'm done. Why do this? Because at this point I thought this was the scene I was waiting for, because I thought these characters are, if we're going to keep going, something has to come to a head, or we're just going to spin our wheels through the end. And as I said, there was so much lightness prior to this. Then we get into this real darkness with ECT. We get this scene, just the anger that Wes has. It put me in an emotional point, so much so that as we get to sort of the final, how they each sort of resolve their issues with Wes at that last track meet, and then as we see Bill sort of cleaning out the garage and the montage. I look over at Emma. She's in tears. That sets me
really?
Off. Yes, both of us are watching, Bill take his wedding ring off and just,
right.
all of that. And yes, the fact that the most powerful part was the montage, I think speaks volumes to J.K. Simmons' ability to really, his ability as an actor, take away the dialogue. How can he communicate emotionally what he's going through as he's letting go of all these pieces? It was not what I expected out of this movie. So we're both crying. My wife, who had come in just towards, just a few scenes prior to this, is looking at us like, are you guys crying? And I thought, yes, we are, because we've gone on this arc, and maybe it's because of those pieces. I thought there's something, it's not one of those scenes where it's some movies you can get that easy tear-jerking moment by something really obvious. To me, this was really about having spent time with Wes, having spent time with Bill, going on this journey. And I did not expect to be in tears at the end. Emma just completely lost. I mean, it was a little weepy. She's just full on, right? Tears straight down her face. So for us, it was an emotional journey that I hadn't expected on this. So as I think back about this movie, I've got that sitting there at the end. But again, as we've talked through everything, I can point to all these things where this film shouldn't have gotten that reaction out of me, or it should have been a better film. But the end, for me, somehow this payoff lifted this film above all those issues. And I found myself at the end saying, this film is better than I expected it to be. But to me, I guess it's an emotional side. And I think for Emma, she's 17. She hasn't seen a lot of these types of movies, so I'm really glad she enjoyed it. Because she didn't go through, the 90s watching all kinds of, indie, weep dramedies, pulling at your heartstrings movie that's just made to make you cry. So I'm glad I got to share that experience with her.
This one is that.
Yes.
This one is just made to make you cry.
Yes, exactly. And I think, I think there are performances here. Again, it's so uneven. It's the challenge I have with this. And cliches and things so for people that, I guess for a younger audience, I think they may connect to this. They may come into this and enjoy it more because they don't have that back catalog of films to compare it to say, oh, this film did this better, or, oh, these are cliches. We've seen this done better before. This one is really struggling with this. And if you can just, connect with these characters and go on that purely emotional side, yes, I think this can be an enjoyable film. If you turn off the analytical, film reviewer part of your brain, I think you can enjoy this film in a way that is unique. But I think audiences out there, for most, if you've seen a lot of films like this, you're probably gonna not be that impressed with it.
Well, I'm glad it connected with you guys, though. That's nice that it actually brought that back at the end. It definitely did not do that for me. It felt like too quick a turn, especially since we were going through all that intensity and all that, sort of dreariness. It didn't pull it out for me, but I'm really glad it worked for you guys in that way. That's kind of special.
Yeah, those little bonding moments. We'll always have our Sunday afternoon Bachelors weeping moment that we will always look back on.
There you go.
Fondly.
It's a memory maker.
Yes,
it's the best thing.
Exactly. So, I wasn't sure how this one was going to hit you because I know, movies focusing on, sort of tragedy and loss can sometimes really resonate with you, or at other times really fall short. So, for
this
you,
one was unfortunately on the short side.
Okay. So, given that, how did this one stack up for you on Flickchart? Because I'm curious.
It comes
to
in
see.
really, really low,
Okay.
unfortunately. And I would have liked to given it credit for the innovative stuff that it was doing film wise, and for, again, that concept that you definitely can sense from the filmmaker when it comes up there. But for me, it ends up kind of like in a mess of like old 80s and 90s movies that we look back at now that aren't really as good as we might have thought back then. So it comes in for me at 183 out of 193, so very close to the bottom. And it's just below Splash for me and just above A League of Their Own. Oh. So, and which is above Outbreak. So it's kind of like all the same scene down there as a bunch of movies that probably worked when we were the age that you're saying it will resonate with right now. Yes. Right? That we were that age when we saw those movies. Yeah. But now as we watch them back, we might not like them as much. So I think probably you are accurate in the way that you're thinking the people that will like it will be, because I probably would have needed to be that age with that much impressionist ability to be able to like this movie too. How did it work for you?
As I said, it's a little bit higher because they still have this heart issue with this movie that I always look at that and say, well, now I'll be interested to see if I ever come back and watch this again, how it plays out. But it ended up at 166 out of 351. So this is really, really interesting. It ends up sandwiched between these two odd sci-fi movies, just above Alien Covenant. And okay. And just below Under the Skin, which was the Scarlett Johansson.
I don't know that one.
That one's
okay.
Yeah, okay. But if I go out one more each, just below Alien Covenant is Lean on Pete. And,
okay, interesting.
And just above Under the Skin is 500 Days of Summer.
Oh, wow.
So which I think emotionally I feel like, you've got the devastation of Lean on Pete, and you've got sort of the lighter romance side of 500 Days of Summer, and in between you get The Bachelors. Okay, that's
that
where we are.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
average them out. You have a little baby. It's The Bachelors,
which puts it at 3 stars for me because I have issues, but I still enjoyed it. And I think I always want to enjoy things more than being, nitpicking or resentful about, flaws in a film, because it didn't totally pull me out. I did, yes, say, oh, these are issues, but I can see the intent and purpose behind those decisions. They could have perhaps been executed better, but I know they were working in the right direction. And again, maybe with a little more experience, craftsmanship will improve, but I know that everything was done with the right intention.
So you said that gave you a 3 stars? Is that what you said?
Yes, that gives me a 3 stars.
So for me, for all those same reasons, it's not the half star that Flickchart said it should give it, and it's a 1.5 for me.
Oh my!
So it's still, I mean, it's still really a weak film for me. But again, for all reasons you mentioned, like you see conceptually what they were trying to do. There are some innovative film things. We haven't really talked about the acting too much either, because we're happy with a lot of the roles. But in general, there was a lot of really kind of stilted acting from some of the characters too. So
yes.
I'm just giving it 1.5 and a not like for me.
I can't imagine there's anybody you're going to recommend this to based on that.
No, we're in a pretty little rut here. We went from The Hostiles to Lean on Pete to The Bachelors. So I'm really excited for us to roll the dice and get something a little bit more positive here.
More positive, something that's more enjoyable, more positive.
That's what I mean. More positive, okay. Better review. Yeah,
better review. Something we can say, yes, we're excited about this discovery. We want to share it.
Where's that
people.
Cuban Fury? That's just what we're talking about, right? Where's that Cuban Fury for us?
All right. Well, we'll see. I'm gonna have to dig through the archives there and see if we've got something that's got that potential.
Love it.
All right. Well, thank you, listeners. If you haven't already, please head over to iTunes and give us a rating and a review. It helps other film fans discover us. And if you choose to support us on Patreon, you're joining a great community of film fans, including some that are really into film as art and some that are just really into enjoying movies for the fun of it. And we would love to have you join that community. I want to take special thanks to Pete Wright for taking time out of his busy schedule to edit these episodes together for us. JJ, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks. See you next month.
Hondo.